Hello. Hi. This is Brandy Rose Smith, live from the Forbidden Library. Welcome to another Sunday story time, where we will read more Misperception. Without further ado, I will get on with the recap. Brain's taking a little while to cook. It's been like nearly a whole week since it has been a whole week since I streamed. Hello, ayo, rippy dippy. It's been a whole week. But I feel a bit better. I should be able to get back into streaming a bit more regularly again after this week. And we might even finish this book today, which will be exciting. I didn't put final on the stream because I really wasn't sure. With 84%, it's up in the air. We don't know. So let me summarize. 84% of misperception for you. This could take a little bit of time. So, Felix. Felix has been locked in a cage his whole ass life. He doesn't know what's out there. There was scratches on the floor like someone else has been here before him. And he also lives with these three strange creatures called the Tormentors that come in and torment him every day, hence why he called them Tormentors. One day, he's taken out of his cage and taken to somewhere really bad where he can hear screaming of other people, and there's so many more Tormentors. And he wakes up at one point while he's there after they've knocked him out, and they're operating on him. And then when he goes back to sleep and he wakes up, he's back in his old cage. And he assumes, well, they must be preparing him to be eaten, because obviously that's where your leaps of logic go to. Therefore, he now needs to escape. So, after biting one of the Tormentor's hands, he manages to escape the Tormentor and the prison hole he was locked in, to go into the wide world, where he gets nearly eaten by something else on four legs that we don't know what it is, and eventually finds his way to a city where he finds people that are like him, that we have been assuming from this point on to be trash pandas, because the situation was very much like being taken to the vet, although terrifying from his point of view. So, we assume trash pandas. And then this trash panda takes him to the head of the trash panda mob called Nikolai, and Nikolai's like, hey, you need to get me food or else I'll eat you. And then he can't get him food because he has no idea what he's on about, because poor old Felix doesn't know anything about the outside world. So he runs into Riley, and Riley's a bro. Riley's like, hey, Riley doesn't offer to take him, because Riley's trying to leave. You're not supposed to leave the colony, but he's trying to leave. And Felix finds out he's trying to leave and then promptly blackmails him into taking him along. The two manage to escape the town, the city. They go into a little forest. They go through the forest. They find another town. They run away from lots of scary monsters in the town. They have to climb up some scaffolding to get away from the monsters, only to be found by Nikolai and the mob. So they climb down the scaffolding, and Riley gets hit by one of the monsters, and his leg's really fudged up. So Felix manages to drag him away. They manage to recuperate for a little bit and then carry on. Riley's still not that great. Shut up! And then they run into Sus Clarence. Also, hi. Hello, Luke. It's nice to see you. And they run into Sus-ass Clarence. Sus-ass Clarence leads them to a place called Utopia, in which was totally not a utopia. It was totally a place where the Tormentors catch people like them and put them in cages and the stuff like that. It was terrible. And I'm good. I'm feeling a lot better than I have recently, and I'm hoping to get back into streaming a bit again. So it'll be good. Yeah. How are you? They managed to escape from that utopia that Clarence took them to, and then they got to, I think it was the Necrotic Tangle. It was like a dead forest they had to go through to get to the utopia. And and then they got found by Nikolai and his last remaining henchman, Damien, because his other henchman also got caught by the people in Utopia, and he got taken away. And is probably dead or worse. So that's about where we are. I feel like we've got a showdown to get for the final with Nikolai, and then we're probably going to have some kind of epilogue-y kind of thing to maybe get to the Promised Land, which is this amazing fantasy land where they'll have all their worries will melt away that they've been trying to get to from the start. So let's see if it's true, if it's real, and if they can actually get away from Nikolai. Sticking his hand out to keep Felix behind him, Riley warned, "Stay back, Felix!" His gaze was locked on Damien, who was standing there menacingly, twitching out of control in front of them. Fang had told Felix previously that Damien had a problem with something called the stuff. It was apparent that his problem was persisting. "What do you want from us, Damien?" Oh, okay, it was only Damien that caught up with them, not Nikolai yet. I couldn't remember. "Oh, Riley," Damien began. His right eye twitched. "You know what I want from you." "Oh, yes, you do. I can't let you go. But it's nothing personal. I'm strictly following the rules. Yeah, following orders. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal at all." "You've gone far out of your way to stop us," Riley said. "Seems incredibly personal." "You would have done the same, Riley," Damien cried. "You would have. In fact, you did. You already have done the same. You're no better than I am. We both know what we have. We both know what we both do what we have do in order to make can show that you get your Sorry. Damien is the worst character to start this with, god damn it. I'm not warmed up yet. "In order to make sure we can survive. Yeah, survival is key to it all." Glancing away from him sheepishly, Riley almost seemed to acknowledge everything Damien was saying was true. "You're not the same, Riley," Felix declared boldly, speaking up for his friend. Yeah, definitely. Both Damien and Riley turned their attention to Felix, and Damien started laughing hysterically. Oh yeah, we did have the reveal that that Riley used to work for Nikolai. "He doesn't know a thing you've done, does he?" No, that's Damien, sorry. "He doesn't know a thing you've done, does he?" he cried. "Your friend here has done some awful things, little Felix. Terrible, dreadful things. Truly abhorrent." Riley's head sunk lower and lower in shame. "The difference between the two of you is that Riley has a conscience," Felix cried out. "He feels remorse for the things he's done, and has actively tried to do better. But I don't think you feel anything." Damien cackled. "The only thing that matters is surviving," he said. "What good is being proud of the things you've done if you're dead?" Oh, hello, ADTR 210. Welcome. We're reading a book. No good at all. "What about everyone doing their part and surviving together?" Felix offered. Damien burst out with laughter once more. "The boy's delusional," he cried. "Delusional, I say. You've been filling his head with fairy tales." "It's not a fairy tale," Felix insisted. "We're all on the same side here. You, me, Riley, Nikolai, and all our kind. Don't you see? We've let the dangers out here drive us apart instead of bringing us together." Damien cackled. "Oh, poor sweet naive baby. Truly touching. Very touching. Indeed. Yeah," he said. "Good idea. Let's all chip in and do our part so everyone can survive. Then, maybe afterwards, we can all sing Kumbaya around the campfire. Kumbaya." You believe this kid? "Felix is right," Riley said. We should have all been working together. And if you can't be proud of the things you've done, then you might as well be dead. Damien scoffed and took a step toward them. Oh, brother, he said. You make a good pair. I'll tell you that much, yeah. You can choose whatever side you want. You sure can. But I'm on my own side. Where's Nikolai? Riley asked, countering Damien's step forward with a step forward of his own. He wanted me to pass along a message. That he's thinking of you. Yeah, he did, Damien said. It sounded like a nice message to pass along, but when you considered who sent it, it was probably meant as a threat. He sends his warmest regards, and he can't wait to see you soon. Ha! See you soon! So what now? Riley asked. Are you gonna eat us? Damien laughed again. Unfortunately not, he said. We received word shortly after your escape that some at the colony were planning a little excursion of their own. Bad for business, very bad. But you know what they say. When the cat's away, the mice will play. Nikolai decided to go back and put them in their place. Yep, that's what he did. Then he ordered me to take you back there alive and make an example out of you. What are you going to do if we run away right now? Riley asked. Glancing down at Riley's wounded leg, Damien grinned and licked his lips. He just said, I couldn't kill you, he said. Yep, that's all he said. I didn't say that I had to bring you back in one piece. God damn it. It's getting real. Riley gritted his teeth. If it were up to me, Damien continued, I'd make it easy on you. Yep, I would. I'd just eat you here, and now, and be done with it. Huh? How thoughtful of you, Riley replied. The tension in the standoff had reached its breaking point, neither side willing to concede an inch to the other. So, what'll it be, gentlemen? Damien asked. I'd love to stay here all day, but we really should get going back to Metropolis. Yeah, don't you think? Riley stared him down. I don't think so, Damien, he said defiantly. We're not going anywhere with you. So, you're going to try run then? Damien asked. Fine with me. I haven't had a good chase in a while. A long while, I tell you. Who knows? I might even get a half-decent meal out of it, too. Licking his lips, Damien took another step forward. You could let us go, Riley said as Damien inched closer. Damien cackled. It's not up to me, he said. No, it's not. If it were, I wouldn't. I don't know if I would give. I don't know if I would have given this much effort into bringing back two of the most pathetic creatures I've ever encountered. He pointed back and forth to Felix and Riley. It's a miracle you managed to survive out here this long. Yeah, a miracle. As he continued moving closer, with each step, Riley was now moving backwards. His arm was still protectively shielding Felix, and together the two of them were slowly trying to creep away. Especially this one, Damien said, motioning towards Felix. How he managed to survive is beyond me. Yeah, he looks like he couldn't find his way out of a wet paper bag. With Damien no more than a few steps away from them, Riley suddenly lunged forward and tackled him to the ground. His hands were holding back Damien's flailing arms, fending off one blow after another, doing the only thing he could to try stave them off. Riley sunk his teeth into Damien's shoulder. Damien cried out, but was able to shake free. He quickly turned the tables on Riley, pushing him off, and then jumping back on top of him and pinning his arms to the ground. Riley struggled in Damien's grasp. Damien grinned down wickedly as Felix's fallen companion. Using both of his hands to hold Riley down, Damien looked ready to bite down into his neck and deliver the final blow. But just before he could, Felix leapt into action and ploughed his head right into Damien's stomach, sending him momentarily to the ground. However, he didn't stay there for long. Quickly recovering from the blow, he charged towards Felix. Riley pushed Felix aside and jumped in between them, driving Damien back even. But his strength was no match for Damien's, and his adversary slowly began to overpower him. Digging his good leg firmly into the ground, Riley yelled back to Felix, "Get out of here!" Felix had no intention of leaving Riley behind. He lunged for Damien again, but Damien simply kicked his leg out forcefully and Felix was dispatched of easily. He went tumbling to the ground, clutching at his ribs. Riley thrust forward, and with Damien unsteady from the kick he'd just delivered, he was finally able to get the upper hand and push him back, creating some space between them. Riley tried to land a blow to Damien's face, but Damien nimbly dodged it by leaning back in the nick of time. He grabbed Riley's outstretched arm and turned him around, pinning Riley's back to his chest. Grabbed Riley's outstretched... sorry. I'd lost track of the flow for a minute there. Riley struggled helplessly for a moment, but Damien had him in a hopeless deadlock, and with a wicked grin, used the only weapon he had left at his disposal, sinking his teeth right into the nape of Riley's neck. Oh no! This is not good. Riley let out a terrible scream in pain. His attempts to escape from Damien's clutches became more desperate. Felix could do nothing but look on in horror. Riley was gritting with pain and staring straight at Felix. "Go!" he uttered in between clenched teeth. "Now!" "Riley!" Felix shouted. Damien withdrew his teeth and came down once more. Then, when they sunk in for a second time, Riley screamed and then went completely limp. Withdrawing his teeth again, Damien dropped Riley's lifeless body to the ground, wiping his face with the back of his hand. No! He turned towards Felix. Damien was completely derailed. This was no longer a recovery mission. He intended to kill them both. Glancing over at Riley, Felix was hopeful that by some miracle his friend would come back to life and win the fight, but he remained motionless. Felix was just about to get up from the ground and take off running when a voice from behind him, mixed with laughter, interrupted them. "Oh no. Well done, Damien," the voice said, in between delighted laughs. "Well done indeed." Felix whipped his head around, and from behind one of the rotten trees of the necrotic tangle, he watched the enormous figure of Nikolai, who the voice belonged to, emerge. Fuck! No! I refuse to believe Riley's dead. I refuse! Even though he had death flags all over him, I refuse! Felix is fucked. Felix is fucked. Felix is fucked. Oh, he ain't getting out of this shit. Oh, he's fucked. Completely fucked. And now he's gonna have to run from destiny. Apparently. Nikolai! Damien cried out. He seemed just as surprised and frightened to see his boss as Felix. "The situation at the colony is worse than we thought," Nikolai began, I fear we'll soon have a rebellion on our hands. We need to show them what happens to all dissenters. I wanted to bring both deserters back alive to make an example out of them. He stared over at Riley's motionless body and frowned. But then he looked over at Felix, and his trademark villainous grin returned, revealing all of his massive teeth. I suppose little Felix alone will have to do. Sitting on the ground in between them, Felix scurried away a couple of inches as Nikolai began slowly creeping closer to him. His gaze still locked right into Felix's eyes. Felix couldn't look away, but suddenly Nikolai stopped, and his one good eye widened. "That's why you're so familiar!" Nikolai exclaimed. "I couldn't place it before. It's your eyes. You have her eyes, and right now, you have the same terrified look on your face that she had right before I killed her." Felix was obviously confused. "Who?" he cried. "Oh, little Felix," Nikolai said. "Poor, sweet, innocent little Felix. Your mother, of course. You killed my mother." I'm just expecting to turn around and I am your father. That's the wrong button. "You killed my mother?" Felix flashed back one more time to the scene of his mother fleeing through the winding alleys of Utopia that he'd frequently seen in his dreams, and the picture became astoundingly clear. Subconsciously, Felix had already realized that it hadn't been the metal arm who had killed his mother. But when he'd made that discovery, he didn't really care to delve much deeper into the mystery. At the time he'd heard her screams in the distance, the metal arm had been holding little Felix in its arms, which meant it couldn't have been the thing that ended her. Before that happened, though, and even before Felix's mother had abandoned him, she'd been running through the alleys. When she turned back, over her shoulder, her eyes widening in terror at the sight of something sinister lurking in the shadows. Now, Felix realized it hadn't been the metal arm that was chasing after her at that point. No, it certainly wasn't the metal arm, because, as the memory resurfaced, the outline of the shadowy figure became clear as day, before finally revealing itself. "They'll be here soon!" wasn't warning of the metal arm's arrival. That was lurking in the shadows. What was lurking in the shadows, chasing after her, was Nikolai all along. Da, da, da. Wait, I don't have to make that noise myself. I forget that I have soundboard. Nikolai let out a booming laugh. "I have to admit, your mother did well in hiding you," he said. "We searched high and low, but never found you. We assumed you were dead. Yet here you are, in the flesh. I'm a little offended that you didn't remember me. And when you came to see me a few days ago, little Felix. But I guess it's not that surprising, considering you were just so young last time we met. Besides, I didn't remember you at the time either. My, how you've grown. Yes, Nikolai killed Felix's mother. In Utopia." "What are you talking about?" Felix demanded. His head was spinning. "Poor little Felix," Nikolai continued, with a feigned sense of sympathy. "Don't you remember? You don't remember anything, do you?" Felix stared at him with blank terror. "I guess it wouldn't be fair to kill you without filling you in on the whole thing, now would it?" "Yes, please monologue for me." Nikolai asked. I love how typical of a villain Nikolai is. I love villain tropes. In fact, it'll make your ending more satisfying. I chased your mother all the way to Utopia and killed her because she had the audacity to oppose my reign after your father's disappearance. My father? Felix repeated. Oh dear, Nikolai said. There's so much to explain and yet so little time to do so. That's right, Felix, your father. What? Clarence, the leader of the colony before me. Clarence is my father, Felix cried. Bryony cried. What? I know Clarence had that moment of like, do I recognize him? And I thought maybe he'd be Clarence's son, but yeah. Da da da. Indeed. He finally realized what was behind the faint expression of recognition that crossed Clarence's face when they first met, but then quickly faded. It was the same thing that had been on the tip of Clarence's tongue that he couldn't quite place. The reason he'd stared at Felix so intently, because he was desperate to recapture the thought that was on the verge of breaking through. It was even the very same thing Nikolai had been struggling to connect each time they'd encountered one another, and had taken him until now to finally realize. Felix had the same vivid blue eyes as his mother. So, you do remember your dear old dad, Nikolai laughed. Clarence had this insane idea to lead us all to the place they spoke about in the fairy tales. The Promised Land, they called it. But Clarence was completely delusional. He was leading us to all our deaths, to a place that doesn't exist. Of course he had to be stopped, but nobody was brave enough to do it. Nobody except for me, of course. I arranged for him to be taken out of the picture, and when he was, I rose majestically to power. Majestically. Majestically. Felix found it incredibly disturbing how proud Nikolai was of himself and his evil deeds. Unfortunately for you, your mother tried to overthrow me, but her opposition was quickly snuffed out, Nikolai continued. Fortunately for you, as I said before, she found a place to stow you away, a place where I couldn't get to you. That is, until a few days ago when you stumbled right back to me. It's kind of humorous when you think about it. If you'd never left your prison, I never would have found you. You know what they say. Curiosity kills the cat. He laughed maniacally at this. Felix could appreciate the great irony of the whole thing, but he was certainly less amused by it than Nikolai. And now, fate has brought us back together, Nikolai said as he took a menacing step forward. Don't you see, Felix? This is your destiny. Oh, fuck. I love how cheesy Nikolai is. He's so wonderful. Felix couldn't listen to another word of it. Quickly scrambling to his feet, he took off, running away. I love it when they run, Nikolai declared delightedly. Oh, lordy. Ducking and weaving through the tree roots of the necrotic tangle, Felix just narrowly avoided them. He was running so fast that the branches seemed to appear through the fog out of nowhere. The leaves of the forest floor were slick with rainwater that probably never dried because the sun never shined in this place. One false move and it was all over. Felix turned his head to one side. He was flanked by Damien, on the other, Nikolai. Their eyes were locked on him, and each was panting madly and keeping pace with his every step. Their prey drive had completely taken over, and Felix was on the menu tonight. Neither seemed to care as much about the tangling roots as they ripped forward through them on a path to him, leaving a trail of broken tree limbs in their wake. To his horror, Felix saw that they were gaining on him, Damien more so than Nikolai. He had to lose them one way or another. Felix didn't realize it, but the whole time he was running, his feet were turning swiftly under him without crunching a single leaf beneath him, just like Riley had taught him. It was almost like he was running on clouds. "I got you now!" Damien suddenly cried out. Cocking his head again, Felix saw Damien was right behind him, his hand outstretched to grab him. In the nick of time, Felix slinked his neck away just as Damien swiped down, his hand narrowly brushing against the hairs on the back of Felix's neck, but came up empty-handed. Felix made a quick cut through the forest away from him, toward the side Nikolai was on, trying to follow. Damien's foot slid out from under him, and he went sliding off in the opposite direction. "Get back here!" Damien cried angrily. Yeah, right, Felix thought. But he had put enough space between himself and Damien that he felt safer, but Nikolai was still hot on his trail. "You can't run from destiny, little Felix!" Nikolai cried madly. Either way, Felix was going to try. He ducked under a low-hanging root and then turned his head. Nikolai ploughed right through it, keeping his gaze fixed on his prey and closing in on him. Turning back ahead, Felix saw a thicket of dead roots wrapped tightly between two trees appear in the fog. Making a break for it, he ducked when he reached it, sliding through the narrow space under the tangle. Nikolai, on the other hand, continued on his path. Only the thicket of roots was too thick for him to break through this time, and he became snagged in them. When Felix glanced back, he saw he was only putting more space between them as Nikolai wrestled helplessly with the roots. A wave of relief passed over Felix. However, relief quickly turned back to dread when he saw Damien had returned to the chase, madder and hungrier than ever. Felix made another quick cut to try lose him again, but this time Damien was ready for it and didn't lose an inch. "Nice try," Damien called out. Breathing was becoming a labor, and Felix's lungs felt like they were on fire. Up ahead, he saw the scattering of trees that lined the boundary of the necrotic tangle thin out. Normally, the forest had been his and Riley's ally, but now he knew that it was hindering him. Again, one false move and he was done for. Besides, he could never hope to outrun Damien or Nikolai in here forever. He decided to make a break for the edge of the forest. When he emerged into the daylight, before him he saw the familiar towering glass buildings of Utopia. Racing towards the city, he hoped he might be able to lose Damien somewhere among the labyrinth. As he ran, he felt the terrain change beneath his feet to pavement. Faintly, he thought he could hear the distant screams crying out for help. But there was another, even more terrifying sound that met him as he emerged from the necrotic tangle. It started first as a deep rumbling, but before long, the familiar, foul beast revealed itself, followed by an entire herd. The monsters had returned, or the cars. As Felix sprinted ahead, he was caught dead in their path. With their terrifying speed, there was no way he could make it to Utopia before they swallowed him whole. However, with Damien behind him, he also couldn't go back. Felix was helplessly trapped. The monsters were closing in behind him, and Damien was closing... The monsters were closing in beside him, and Damien was closing in behind him, about to meet the same fate as Felix was beginning to accept. With what he assumed were his last thoughts, Felix was filled with nothing but regret. Once again, he strangely began to regret ever having left the prison. Nothing he had experienced there had been worse than what he'd experienced beyond its walls, and Nikolai had even said it himself. If he'd never left, he never would have found him, and none of this would have happened. Closing his eyes, Felix took what he thought would be his last breath, as adversaries surrounded him on all sides. A forceful blow struck him from one side and threw him to the other, leaving him tumbling along the ground. The blow was strong, and it had knocked the wind out of him, but miraculously, he was still alive. He opened his eyes just in time to see what had pushed him out of the way. And apparently we have to wait the whole next chapter for that to happen, which means you're waiting for me to take a small drink before we carry on. Damn. Now we know all the things. Sus Clarence was his dad. I'm hoping what pushed him out of the way is Riley. I don't want Riley to be dead, so it's Riley. That's what pushed him out of the way. Or is it going to be Clarence? Is Clarence coming back for his son? And he's going to be like, oh no, I'm sorry I left you, baby. I don't know. Because it says redemption, it could be both. Let's find out, shall we? Damien withdrew his teeth from Riley's neck. What? Wait. Aha, oh no, it's a flashback. I got really confused. I thought we'd somehow ended up on the other chapter. Damien withdrew his teeth from Riley's neck and came down once more. When his teeth sunk in for a second time, Riley screamed and then went completely limp. Withdrawing his teeth again, Damien dropped Riley's lifeless body to the ground, wiping his face with the back of his hand. Nikolai appeared next, and together he and Damien gave chase after Felix, before disappearing deeper into the necrotic tangle. Riley awoke a few moments later in a daze, critically wounded, but Damien had failed to finish him off. Yes! Placing her hand to the wound on his neck, Riley rose from the ground unsteadily. Gradually, his control came back to him. Through the forest, he could clearly see the path the others had taken from the clearing of roots left on the broken forest floor. It looked like a monster had passed through the area. Riley limped ahead with nothing driving him except pure determination, a surge of adrenaline and a singular thought. He wasn't going to let Felix die. You're the best dad, Riley, okay? You have the best dad award. The whole time, he'd been trying to convince himself that if it came down to it, and Felix was holding him back, he was going to leave him behind. However, he had only said those things because he couldn't handle being responsible for another life. Not after what happened to Leroy. He was determined. He wasn't going to let it happen again. Riley limped through the forest until he reached the clearing. Up ahead, he could see the towering glass buildings of Utopia. He lost the trail near here. For a moment, he feared he'd failed yet again. However, out of the corner of his eye, something caught his attention and he quickly turned. There, emerging from the forest, but straight into the path of oncoming monsters, was Felix. With every ounce of fight he had left in him, Riley raced towards his friend. He wanted to cry out to him, but he didn't want to expend the energy. Instead, he powered ahead, his mind slipping in and out of consciousness. 1 second he was racing towards Felix, the next he was racing towards Leroy. The events ran parallel in his mind as he flashed back and forth. Every time he'd played back the events of Leroy's death in his mind, he had the same thought. If only I'd been a little bit faster. As he raced towards Felix, he now knew what he had to do. When he lost Leroy at the hands of the monsters, it was because Riley had been trying to save both himself and his brother. Oh no. Riley, I didn't want you back for this! Riley! In order to save Felix to be a little bit faster, he now knew one of them had to absorb the hit. And it had to be him. Lunging forward towards his friend, Riley pushed him out of harm's way. Felix tumbled along the ground and then turned just in time to see it. To see it had been Riley that saved him. Their eyes met one final time and exchanged words they could have never said to one another. Helplessly, Felix watched from only a few feet away as the monster roared towards his friend and then devoured him whole in an instant. The monsters carelessly continued on their course, seemingly unsatisfied. In the spot where they'd just gobbled up Felix's friend, nothing remained. Likewise, Damien's entire being had vanished as well. Felix sat, stupefied a moment, unable to comprehend what he'd just witnessed. What broke him from his trance was the sight of a familiar face peeking through the forest. "There you are!" Nikolai cried out when his eyes met Felix's. "I feared for a moment I'd lost you." Although Felix's legs felt numb under him, he knew he had to run again. Well, that wasn't the shortest chapter on the whole planet! He's dead. A moment for Riley. I mean, he came back from the dead once. It could happen again, right? Right? But we must... enemy of my... oh no, enemy of my enemy. I don't like the idea. The enemy of the enemy is the metal arm. Is he gonna get Nikolai captured? Let's see, shall we? Oh, O'Reilly. Felix made a break for the alleyway between the two towering buildings of Utopia in front of him. As the sun began to set over the place, the mirrors came to life, sealing Felix away in the labyrinth. His legs were wobbly beneath him, and he used the mirrors to support himself as he continued. And if he didn't, he was surely going to kneel over from exhaustion or shock. He hadn't completely processed it yet, but Riley was gone. His only friend out here had been taken from him. Before a few days ago, Felix never would have even dreamed of having someone as important in his life as Riley was. But now, he felt like his friend had been ripped from him, and Felix could feel tears welling in his eyes. The whole thing felt like a dream. More like a nightmare, really. And the fact that he was wandering aimlessly through the labyrinth of mirrors that had first appeared in his dreams only made it feel even more so. To make matters worse, a madman was somewhere in here with him, hell-bent on ending him. Almost as if the thought of him alone was enough to summon him to the depths of hell itself, Nikolai's form materialized in one of the mirrors in front of Felix and halted him in his tracks. But it didn't stop there. Nikolai materialized in another mirror, besides Felix, and another on the other side, and then another behind him. Before Felix knew it, there were several figures of his adversary, each bearing down at him with wide Cheshire cat grin plastered on his face. Well. The several forms of Nikolai began in unison as his deep voice reverberated off the mirrors. I'm afraid this is the end of the line for you, little Felix. Felix knew he was right, and for a moment he thought about giving up. But a singular thought shot up like a flare through the back of his mind. He wasn't going to let Riley's death be in vain. Felix observed his foe patiently, and when Nikolai, the real Nikolai, went to strike, Felix ducked out of the way just in time and took off running again in the opposite direction. But Nikolai gave chase in hot pursuit. The grin never left Nikolai's face, even for a moment. The line between him and the monsters blurred. I cannot do this word right now. I cannot. I know it, but say but my mouth is not doing it right now. Irrevocably. There we go, I got it. Irrevocably blurred. Nikolai had taken on an entirely new identity and became some kind of nightmarish cross between the two. Worst of all, he wasn't chasing after Felix as the monsters did. The monsters did it out of necessity. If they didn't eat, they couldn't live. For Nikolai, it was game, and he was enjoying the chase. "That's it, little Felix," Nikolai cried out with feigned playfulness. "Really make me work for it." Felix knew he needed to think of a plan. One to be rid of Nikolai once and for all. At first, he thought about leading Nikolai right back to where he'd seen Riley and Damien gobbled up by the monsters, and feeding them Nikolai. That would have been a fitting end for the monstrous villain Nikolai had become. Although that plan had far too many variables. For one, that was to say that Felix himself wouldn't be gobbled up by the monsters this time. After all, the only reason he'd survived their onslaught in the first place was because of Riley. Somewhere close by, once again, Felix thought he heard faint screaming. Another plan began to take shape. Racing for the alleyway, Felix's ears honed in on the screaming that he heard. When the alleyway split, he followed them, skidding into a left turn and parkouring himself off the mirrored glass wall, and then zipping down the alleyway again. Nikolai was still close on his tail, turning likewise and barreling into the wall at an angle. But the impact didn't even slow him down for a second. He cackled even harder. "You can't run forever, little Felix," Nikolai cried. It was a good thing he didn't intend to. The further Felix ran, the closer the distant screams grew. When he finally emerged from the alleyway, he saw the building that was the source of all the screaming, and through the mirrored window, he could just barely make out the prisoners all lined up in a neat row of cells lined with metal bars. Felix now knew that this was the Metal Arm's own lair, the place where the beast kept his kind before loading them into its spaceship for transport to the bad place. It was the same place where Felix's mother had abandoned him in his dreams, and the same place where Clarence had led Felix and Riley earlier, right into a trap. Only now, Felix was ready for it. In fact, he was bait for the trap. When the prisoners saw Felix, their cries for help became even more desperate, and they began throwing themselves at the bars of their cells frantically, which created quite the cacophony. Felix raced along the building, pounding his fist against the glass that separated them, enticing them to scream even more desperately. Although he wished he could help them, he knew there was nothing he could do. Nikolai was right behind him. Reaching the end of the building, Felix hooked right again down another alley. The alley split off at another junction, and Felix went right again. Ahead now, Felix could see a stream of light pouring through. He could only hope his plan would work, because he was running out of steam. When he emerged from the alleyway, he hooked another quick right. Behind him, Nikolai was not so graceful and far more reckless, so he fell just a step behind with a much rounder turn. Nevertheless, he fixated on Felix, determined not to let him out of his sights. Beside Felix now, as he ran. Okay, I need a small drink. Small break, 1 second. Okay, let's go. Beside Felix now as he ran was again the same towering glass building which housed the prison cells. Felix had completed a full turn around it. What was standing in front of the towering building and right in Felix's path now would have normally made Felix cry out in terror and then try desperately to turn the other way. Sorry, messing up the finale. And then try desperately to run the other way. However, he'd been expecting it this time. In fact, he'd been banking on it. Standing in front of him was exactly what Felix expected to find. The Metal Arm's lair. The Metal Arm himself. And it let out a horrible shriek that echoed off the mirrored glass walls around them. The foul creature had been summoned by the screams of the prisoners, just as Felix had planned. It was poised with its gangly legs spread out in a wide stance, which made it appear even larger and more terrifying than it already was. Raising its tremendous metal arm, it then thrust it forcefully down, right toward Felix's head. With one last push, Felix sealed his eyes tightly and dove for the gap right between the beast's legs. Felix tumbled to the ground and rolled. He landed on his stomach, but facing the opposite direction than he'd just been running. A few fresh scrapes to commemorate the event scarred his arm, but he was mostly unscathed. More importantly, he was completely uncaptured. Nikolai was not as fortunate. His attention had been fixated on Felix, and by the time he saw the metal arm, it was too late. Felix watched as Nikolai tried to skid to a stop, his eye widening in terror. He wasn't grinning anymore. The horrid beast's metal arm came down and slammed onto the ground, capturing Nikolai and putting a definitive end to his reign of terror. The metal arm cried out with an ear-piercing victory screech. Felix got up from the ground and took off in the opposite direction, not once looking back, as the desperate screams of the helpless prisoners soon faded into the distance. Da-da-da! Nikolai has been defeated! Very smart use of the metal arm. Yes, yes. Brain over brawn. But now what? Now Felix has to find somewhere to live. Because now that's like all the other named characters pretty much gone, except for like Clarence. Clarence is still around, technically, but he's all brainwashed and stuff, so it doesn't really matter. Make sure I'm all fueled up. We only have 7%. We are definitely getting through this. I am going to go ahead and change the title of the stream right now. I wasn't sure if we were going to get through it. I'm going to have to change the thumbnail as well. I forgot about that. Oh well. I'll do that later. Because it's now the final part. Well, I'm not going to stop until it's finished. Let's get to the end of the story. Go. Before long, Felix found shelter in another alleyway. Completely exhausted, he was panting heavily. As he struggled to catch his breath, he finally collapsed to the ground. In front of him, he could see his own reflection in the mirrored glass of the building across from him. His white hair was tousled and stained with muck and grime, which he wore like a badge of honor after everything he'd been through. Felix felt a rush of emotions. His mother had died at the hands of Nikolai, but he wasn't concerned with that. After all, she'd still abandoned him, and he believed she'd gotten what she deserved. Oh, that's mean. That's mean, Felix. She didn't want you to get murdered by a murder man. Nikolai and his henchmen were gone. Without them in the picture, Felix was safe. Well, mostly. It would be night soon, and although Felix had become accustomed to the night, it brought with it unforeseen dangers lurking within the shadows. Although Nikolai and his goons were out of the picture, they were just a microcosm of the dangers that awaited Felix in the world beyond the prison walls. The worst part of it all was that he didn't have Riley by his side anymore. A horrible knot twisted in Felix's stomach when the realization finally caught up to him. Riley was gone. Felix was totally alone in a world in which everything wanted to eat him. On the brink of tears, a strange, unfamiliar noise interrupted his thoughts. A dull roar that was consistently and rhythmically pulsating and then dying out. Although it wasn't an intimidating roar, like that which signified the monsters were approaching, it was surprisingly calming. Rising from the ground, Felix faced the direction of the sound at the other end of the alleyway, almost like it was beckoning him. He began towards it. When he emerged from the alley, the sky above him was a deep hue of violet blotted with pink. Oh no, the monsters. I hope it's not the monsters. I don't think it's the monsters. It will. In the distance, the last crest of the golden sun was just peeking over the horizon, preparing its farewell for the evening. Felix had never seen a sunset as clear or as unobstructed as this. It was truly breathtaking. No, I didn't ooh-ooh, you just imagined it. What are you talking about? That was no ooh-oohing. Gaslight gatekeep, go boss. Walking towards the sunset, the dull roaring continued to build. Before long, he came upon a hill. Don't you dare. Oh no. Quipped. Before long, he came upon a hill where just in front of it, he felt the ground beneath him become grainy and gritty. Looking down, he felt the ground with his hand. Then he dove his hand into the ground, which separated easily, and then reformed around him. When he lifted his hand back up, the grains from the ground are resting in his palm, and when he fanned out his fingers, the grains ran through them. Although Felix had never seen the stuff before, he had heard about it, and even fantasized about it on occasion. It was like very fine rocks, and he knew from Riley's description of it that this was sand. Felix raced for the top of the hill in front of him. When he reached the top, he stared out. There in front of him now was the source of the calming dull roar. It was a huge mass of water that seemed to extend forever, behind which the fleeting sunset was reflecting brilliantly off the waves in the distance. Felix had never been here before, but he had often fantasized about this place as well. Yet, Riley's description of the ocean in front of him didn't seem to serve it justice. The waves were gently cresting and then crashing gracefully onto the sandy shores, producing the peaceful, dull roar that had drawn Felix here. This was the place where the ocean met the sand. The place Riley had dreamed about. The place that only existed in fairy tales. It was the promised land. They made it! He made it, not they. Not they. Felix felt his bottom lip begin to quiver, and he collapsed to the ground, unable to speak. He couldn't avert his eyes from the magnificent view that spread out before him. Tears were welling in his eyes again, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of joy. Well, Riley, he said aloud, we made it. The waves danced along the shore peacefully before him, and Felix felt a wave of optimism wash over him. For the first time, he felt like everything was going to be alright. We made it. And there's like 6% of the book left. I'm scared. But just like the last golden rays of the sun that would disappear with the sunset, Felix's newfound optimism wouldn't last. Without the sun, it quickly became frighteningly dark. The stars in the night sky were brighter than Felix had ever seen them, and among them, the guiding star shined directly above where the sun had disappeared. Just as Riley said, it led straight to the ocean. However, in the darkness, the ocean itself had become a black void of nothingness very quickly. Felix realized once again just how alone he was. When Riley had spoken about the promised land, he'd mentioned that it was a place where the ocean met the sand. Felix had obviously found that place. However, Riley also said it was a place where members of their kind lived in peace and harmony. Suspiciously missing from the place where Felix found himself was anybody else. Before he let fear of loneliness set in, Felix called out, "Hello?" There was no answer. Just the now unseen waves crashing against the shore. Rising, Felix approached them. "Hello?" He tried once more. The waves washed up over his feet and then receded back into the black ocean. Felix walked a little deeper until the waves were "Hello?" You know, having that again. Washing over his knees. Only this time, when they receded again, he could feel them pulling him in. The waves were like hands gripping around his legs, then trying to take him under. Felix's heart began to race as he panicked and scrambled away for safety. The harder he struggled, the more forceful the waves became. Trying desperately to take him with them, almost like the ocean itself was trying to eat him. Frick, this poor boy is just being eaten by everything. When Felix finally broke free from their grasp, he was safely back on the shore, gasping for breath. But safety was an arbitrary term. "Is anybody out there?" he pleaded. Again, there was no response. The tears welled in his eyes again, but the joy was gone, replaced by an impending sense of dread. "Please." Eat, not eat. 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 Trying to eat him. Eat him. Eat him. Eat him. Collapsing to the ground, Felix began sobbing. His stomach twisted in a knot from hunger, and he rolled to the side and doubled over. Not only was there nobody else out here, but there was also no food. A creeping thought made its way in. As much as Felix tried to suppress it, he could not. Maybe Clarence had been right all along? There was no promised land. Felix pounded his fist against the sand in anger. This was a world he had never known and had longed for when he was held within the confines of the prison. Back then, he would have given anything to be a part of it. Be careful what you wish for, he thought. I just want to go home. Felix groaned loudly. The words surprised even him. They seemed to have arisen from some dark corner of Felix's mind that he wasn't even aware of. When he considered them, he couldn't help but chuckle to himself. Home, he repeated. He chuckled a little harder. The prison was the closest thing to home Felix had ever known. The thought crept in once more. Maybe Clarence had been right all along. However, the thought continued beyond that. With everything that Felix now knew, Clarence was his father, but more importantly, he was the leader of the colony before Nikolai. He'd even been seeking the Promised Land when he'd been captured by the metal arm and changed. When he and Felix had been reconnected, Clarence was no longer searching for the Promised Land. In fact, his views of it now reflected the same views Nikolai shared, namely that the Promised Land wasn't real. However, although Clarence's views were similar to Nikolai's, they were still slightly different from them as well. While Nikolai was obsessed with trying to maintain a stranglehold on whatever scarce resources remained at the colony, Clarence had insisted, right before he'd betrayed Felix and Riley, that their only salvation was through the tormentors. Riley himself had even mentioned such a philosophy when he'd spoken about the historic events of the colony that had transpired, even long before he himself was alive. He'd said that when the tormentors moved in, the colony had become splintered. Some of them struggled to maintain their independence, while some willingly enslaved themselves to the tormentors. He'd gone on to say that the tormentors soon began abducting and enslaving them against their will. But the more Felix thought about it, the more he began to wonder, wasn't that better than the alternative? Better than Nikolai's solution to the problem? What if Clarence hadn't betrayed them at all, but he was doing what he truly believed was best? Clarence now certainly saw being enslaved by the tormentors as a better alternative. He didn't look like he was struggling to find food. Besides that, the world Felix had come to know beyond the prison walls was a dangerous place. Especially for someone like Felix. Seemingly everything out here wanted to eat him. Felix had suspected that his tormentors had wanted the same thing, although Clarence and Riley had scoffed at the idea of the tormentors eating one of their kind, and come to think of it, the tormentors had never tried to do such a thing. Although Felix's entire time at the prison had just been Felix's paranoia and his overactive imagination getting the better of him? Felix then had another thought, one that made him feel racked with guilt. If everything he was questioning and everything that Clarence said had been true, then maybe Felix's mother had come to feel the same way, especially after Clarence's disappearance. She'd led her son right into the hands of the metal arm, but maybe she hadn't abandoned him there, as Felix had previously thought. Maybe she'd left him in such a dangerous place because she knew that surrendering him to a life with the tormentors was better than the alternative, than struggling to survive out here. If that was true, then she'd selflessly lured Nikolai away to buy Felix enough time for the metal arm to find him, and take him to a place where Nikolai and all of the other threats out here wouldn't get to him. That was how Felix had come to be in the prison. Felix felt incredibly guilty for bitterly finding justice in his mother's demise. After all, Felix was now beginning to believe she'd sacrificed herself for her son. For once, it all seemed to make perfect sense, and yet, in his mind, his mind was still torn after everything he'd endured inside of the prison. The tormentors seemed to be the lesser of two evils, although Felix was beginning to wonder if the tormentors were really evil at all. At the very least, he couldn't deny the fact that the tormentors fed him. Subconsciously, Felix tried to fend off the idea that of the tormentors as saviors, but it was no use. It had already ingrained itself in his mind. He tried to imagine his life before, but each time he imagined something horrible from his time in the prison, his mind conjured up a realization for it. They tormented him, but maybe they were trying to toughen him up. Or maybe they didn't even see what they were doing as torment. Maybe they just had no sense of personal boundaries. They locked him up, but maybe it was to protect him from the horrors that existed beyond the prison walls. They took him to the bad place, but only once, and maybe there had been some deeper purpose for it that Felix simply couldn't see or understand. Maybe even his alien captors were never really his captors at all, after all, but his protectors. And everything they did to keep him safe. Clarence has said it himself. They feed us and they take care of us. Felix was truly starting to see that maybe he really had been right all along. And his betrayal, which maybe wasn't a betrayal at all, was seemingly justified. However, if Clarence and Felix's mother were both right, and the only way to ensure his survival was to give himself up to the tormentors, then that also meant Riley was wrong. Felix struggled to accept that, but he couldn't dismiss the evidence staring him right in the face. Here he was at the place where the ocean met the sand. What did he find waiting for him here? Simply put, nothing. The promised land wasn't real. Riley had died for this fantasy. Of course, Felix would never hold any of this against his dearly departed friend. Riley had tried to do what he thought was best, and Felix would always be eternally grateful for the time they shared together. But was he prepared to let the same thing happen to him? On top of all that, since his parents' view on the Promised Land now aligned so similarly with Nikolai in his own deluded way, even Nikolai was sort of justified in his actions. Obviously, he'd gone completely off the deep end by taking it too far to one extreme, but at the time, when he'd thwarted Clarence's plan to lead the entire colony to the false paradise of Promised Land, his actions made sense. No, I have never watched Young Sheldon nor Big Bang Theory, so I'm not up on that at all. A journey as treacherous as that, not unlike the one Felix just endured, would have certainly been death for most of the members of the colony, if not all of them. Have I unknowingly referenced something? However, Nikolai's solution to the problem of scarce resources by hoarding them for himself created more hardship for the colony. Fair enough. Leaving its inhabitants more susceptible to many dangers that existed in this world. Felix had come to know these many dangers firsthand, and a couple of times along the journey. He'd, oddly enough, acknowledged that nothing had ever happened inside of the prison that was nearly as bad as what he'd experienced beyond its walls. He was torn by the decision he had to make, but he knew he had to make one. Felix sat in silent contemplation for a long while until finally he'd reached his decision. The hunger pangs had probably significantly influenced it, but in his current state, Felix realized he really only had one choice if he wanted to survive. There was only one place he knew of where the food was guaranteed, and the known threat was far less threatening than the unknown, if it was even a threat at all. Felix was going home, back to the very place he'd fought tooth and nail to escape from. The real promised land was the place where Felix had been. The prison. Oh my god. I did not see this coming. The only problem was, Felix had no idea how to get back there. However, a glimmer of hope found its way to him in the form of the guiding star. It had illuminated the path to the promised land, but it could also serve another purpose as well. After all, Felix had seen the very same star from beyond the large prison window. That meant if he tried to recreate its positioning in the window, he could find his way back. It would be a long and arduous journey, but at the end of it, at least he knew that what would be waiting for him. He just had to convince himself that it was for the best. He's going back to the prison. Damn. I guess this is why the book is called Misperception. It's not because we don't know what Felix is. It's because Felix's perception has been flipped on its head. Kind of a roll credits, I suppose. For 3 days and 3 nights, Felix journeyed home, first winding back through the labyrinth of Utopia and the mangled underbush of the necrotic tangle, creeping back through the monster's lair and the outer reach. He kept the guiding star within his sights as best he could, but it still occasionally disappeared. Fortunately, he never completely lost sight of it. Is he a trash panda? Will we ever find out what he is? I hope there's maybe the last chapter and it's the family getting him back and we get to find out what he is. The hallucinations set in around day 2. Voices from nowhere tried to persuade him not to go back by saying he was walking straight towards his death. And when that didn't work, they argued the tormentors wouldn't even want him back after what he'd done to the smallest one. He'd bitten the hand that fed him, as Clarence put it. Of course, the voices were nothing more than manifestations of his own apprehensions, and his mind struggled with itself in a helpless tug-of-war. Part of him never wanted to go back to the prison, but another part of him, the same part that now believed was responsible for the recurring dreams he'd frequently experienced, encouraged him forward. It was what his mother had died for. Surely, if she was that passionate about her decision, she must have known that was best. As for the latter argument, that the tormentors wouldn't want him back, Felix believed that they would. In fact, he strongly believed that they were looking for him too. Felix now believed the piece of parchment he'd come across, the one Riley claimed had placed a bounty on his head, wasn't that at all. It was a reward for finding him and returning him. The evidence had been there all along, and with that reasoning to push him forward, Felix's decision never wavered. Eventually, he came upon the Glowwood Forest and passed through on his way to Metropolis. Once through here at daybreak on the 3rd night, as Felix was in the midst of mumbling nonsense to himself deliriously, up ahead he could finally see the rising outline of buildings of the prison compound where he had escaped so long ago. Keeping the guiding star behind him, Felix continued between the buildings here. He was on the verge of collapse when he suddenly had a striking suspicion he was being watched. Turning wildly, oh yeah, there was that thing that freaking chased him around the neighborhood. Still got one more thing to deal with, Felix. Turning wildly in every direction, his eyes settle on a horrifying visage. Unfortunately, unsure if it was real or just a powerful visual hallucination, inside of one of the buildings of the compound, behind a large window in front of the structure, was an enormous figure staring out at him. However, the figure was only staring out at him with one of its eyes. The other eye had been scarred, almost beyond recognition. It was Nikolai. What? Frozen in terror, Felix's eyes blinked open and continued in disbelief, but the figure remained. This wasn't a hallucination. This was real. Nikolai's shadow cast menacingly on the ground between them. But Nikolai never moved. There was something strange about him that Felix couldn't quite place. He was staring at Felix, but his gaze seemed glazed over. The glassy look in his eyes was frighteningly hollow, almost like there was nothing behind it at all. The look was the same one Clarence always seemed to wear. Nikolai's gaze was similarly cold and dead. Of course, after last leaving him in the hands of the metal arm, Felix knew his adversary had been changed. A large figure appeared behind Nikolai. Its long neck and gangly limbs formed the easily recognizable shape of the tormentors. Although it wasn't one of Felix's tormentors that he had come to know, still the presence of the alien creatures meant he was getting close. Nikolai disappeared from the window a moment later, and Felix finally struck up the nerve to continue. Slowly he pressed forward while teetering on the edge of consciousness, until finally his legs gave out from under him and he collapsed. His vision was blurry, but in the distance he thought he could make out a familiar figure running towards him, its gangly arms and legs flailing wildly behind it. Another large figure appeared behind the first, and when it saw Felix laying there, sprawled helplessly on the ground, it began calling out, "Felix! Felix! Felix!" it cried, racing over. The smallest of them reached Felix first and scooped him up in its clammy hands. "Kitty! They've been cats the whole time!" Cats, bro. He's a cat. I mean, that made sense with the kitty. But why do you keep a cat in a cage during the night? Oh, there's some of these things that don't add up. But it's been a cat. Cats. Cats, bro. Kitty! Kitty! I mean, I could justify this. We could pretend that this small tormentor does not know the difference between a cat and a trash panda and continue to pretend that they're trash pandas. The smallest tormentor shouted and embraced him tightly against its body. Normally this kind of torment would have caused Felix to try squirm desperately away from the beast, but this time he was too limp to put up a fight. And besides, although he would never admit it out loud, it actually felt kind of nice. Truth be told, he almost missed his alien captors in a real Stockholm Syndrome kind of way. Oh gosh. For the first time in a long time, he felt safe. The largest tormentor reached them a moment later and turned and shouted back over its shoulder, "Martha, the cat's back!" I mean, she could be a really young girl and not know. Felix couldn't understand them because he never could, but it didn't matter because he was home. The end. He was a cat. 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 It seemed... I thought it was... Well, the main thing that threw me off a cat and a bunny that I originally thought it was is that they kind of seem to describe them as bipedal most of the time. So, like, they described hands and things like that. So it felt very strange for them to be cats. To be, like, four-legged creatures. But here we are. It's a cat. Peter, you had me. I didn't guess it. I didn't guess what they were. Why did they keep the cat in a cage when it goes to sleep? I don't know. I suppose you do with some kittens and stuff, don't you? I've seen TikToks of what was it? The bean bakery TikTok with the cat and the thing. Maybe Felix is just that small, a tiny little white kitten. Or he's a Khajiit from Skyrim. Yes, that's a possibility. Felix has words if you'll have coin. That was a really good book. I've thoroughly enjoyed that. I hope everyone else has. It's been a wonderful read. I have like half an hour of streaming that I could still do, but I don't know. I shouldn't be. Go on. I'm glad you did. I know I did. It was very fun. I mean, we got to my 200 subscribers during reading this book. I need an audiobook though. I think you have to talk to Peter about that. I don't know if he's got an audiobook out for this. I don't know. There is a link to the Amazon in the description. So if anyone does feel like supporting the author, you can go down there and grab your own copy. That's fair. Audiobooks are a great alternative if you cannot focus too much on books. They're also great for general, like, commuting. That tended to be when I got really into my audiobooks, was when I was having to commute to work a lot. And now my commute is very short. So, well, my commute is from my bedroom to my office, so... So you don't hear your pals. I suppose that's one way to do it. Keep them out. Lock them out. What should we do? Okay, I was gonna hide this because, like I said, I got to my 200 sub count during the reading of this book, so I wanted to finish off this book. But the next book I'll be reading you next week is... Let me just close it. No, I wanna... No, that's the wrong one. That's the wrong one. I can do things. I can not scoff at all. What are you on about? This one. On this one. Where is it? I have too many things. That one. No. Oh, that one. Yeah, there we go. Let me just show you the book I'll be reading, because like I said, we got to a 200. So you know what book we're reading? We're reading my books, bitch. Books I have written and published. My book one. Why is it not updated? I may need to go like re-download it. Mingirl! Yeah! Mingirl! Oh, that's the... Do you want to see the old cover? This is the old cover. I need to, like, update the version I've got on here. But this is the old cover I used to have. It's not the cover I actually use, though. Let me get the book cover, at least. I mean, you see it. You see it every goddamn stream. I don't even need to get you the book cover, actually. You know what I need to do? It's there! Right over here! This is the book we're reading next. And I suppose I will read you the... Let's go back over here. Get back on my seat, I will read you the blurb. Let me get the blurb up. So you can have an idea. I've said it's a superhero book, but that's not very descriptive, is it? So Let me grab the blurb ready for next week. So, here's what Moon Girl's about. Ever since the turn of the millennium, people have been developing powers. 15 years later, and these people have taken up masks, and the age of heroes and villains has begun. Drada is just trying to get a job, Drada is just trying to get a job and get somewhere with her life. But it doesn't take much to stumble upon a villain's plan. It just took being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or, in Drada's case, hand a job application to the wrong person. In a superhero world that isn't all that it seems, Drada finds her way to a job she never expected. Follow Drada's path to becoming Moon Girl! Yeah! Links in the description if you want to buy it and read along. That would be lovely. And obviously I have the discount code, which I just showed. That still works. Yeah, exciting times. Exciting times. That'll be what we'll go on to. There is not an audiobook. Audiobooks are very expensive to make. And I do not have the patience to record it myself. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but I don't read things perfectly. So it's very difficult to make like a perfect read. Like the person when I read Dogston, no, not Dogston. When I read what was the book before this? Come on, Catatonic. The author of that one actually said, "Would you be interested in doing an audiobook for me?" But I had to refuse for similar reasons that I won't do audiobooks of my own books. In that it's just very hard to read a perfect version of things. Because that was the biggest issue with some of the videos I was doing on my channel before I started streaming, is that the editing it took to get like the perfect reads of the short stories and stuff that are on my channel that are before I started streaming and before I got my shiny model. It's very awkward. But I am both looking forward to and terrified of showing you my book. It's easy reading other people's work, but now I have to read my work and potentially judge it. And I do have a bit of a question, actually. So, Luke can obviously answer, and anyone who's lurking who maybe doesn't want to be in chat, feel free to leave a comment or something like that. But, would you like me to tell you about the inspirations of the book and where some of the ideas and things go from as I go through? Because obviously I could read it and go with the flow like I do normally, but because this is my book I will be reading next week, I can very specifically tell you where a lot of the ideas come from and things like that, but it might affect flow a little bit. Yes, that's a good idea. Okay, that's what I'll do then. I will, because there's very specific things. I look forward to telling you about them. I will rant. It's probably going to take me longer to, okay, cool. Okay, we'll do that. So it's probably going to take me longer to get through Moon Girl than it would normally now, because it's going to be a lot. I have a lot to say about it. And I have to be very good to not insult myself while I do it. It's going to be scary. I'm a little bit scared, but it'll be fine. It'll be fine. I'm sure you guys will like it. And it'll all be good. And I'm thinking about, once I've read Moon 1, I'll read another person's book, and then I might read Moon 2, and then another person's book, and then Moon 3, and because I'd like you to see the whole series. It's cool, and like you don't get the really cool stuff until book 2. Book 1's kind of like character introductions and backstories and stuff like that, but book 2 is the cool one. But anyway, we'll get to it. I will redo the things, and it'll be great. Anything else for me to say today? No. You're cool, bitch. Anything else for you? I don't really have a plan for things when I read things to the end. I know I need to do the new thumbnail, and when I get to the end screen, you'll notice that my schedule says like put Misperception or Moon Girl, because I wasn't sure if I was going to finish it today, but we have! Yay! So I suppose I'll leave it there if there's nothing more for me to do. I will hopefully be back Tuesday. I want to get the Dragoon armor from Final Fantasy. We've hit level 50. I can get the Dragoon armor. We're going to go get the Dragoon armor. And I feel better generally, so I should be able to actually stream on Tuesday now. It's only gonna be 2 streams though, because I'm not jumping straight back into it after not feeling great. We're gonna ease ourselves back in. I don't know what I'm gonna do with focus streams at the moment, on whether I'm gonna do them or whether I'm just gonna do Monday streams every so often. Because last time I did a focus stream, it got a bit. I didn't focus very well because I was too busy looking at chat during those 20 minutes, so it didn't really work like it's supposed to. But maybe I can figure out how to do just a bit of a chatty stream or something like that, because the capybara bit is fun. It's fun to just play something that's not too big thought, or something I don't have to read, and I can just chat to you guys. That's fun. So I'll think about something for that. And maybe it would just be a case of doing shorter streams on the Monday. Just do maybe an hour of chatting shit. And then I log off. And then I do an hour of work. Because I still need to do my author work on Mondays. Monday is author time. But I also want to stream. So we'll figure something out. Other than that, I don't think there's anything really to say, to tell you. Other than I hope you enjoyed the story. Thank you to Peter J. Kenneth for giving me permission to stream it. It has been an absolutely wonderful story. Thank you to Ruby Dippy and Luke in chat. Thank you to anyone who lurked, and thank you to anyone who watched the VOD. If you have not already, I would highly appreciate the likes and a subscribe. They would both be wonderful things that would make me happy. Anything else? Nope. This has been Bryony Rose Smith live from the Forbidden Library. I had fun. I hope you had fun. Goodbye.